It was supposed to be just another quiet Sunday morning, the kind where the smell of fresh coffee fills the kitchen, sunlight filters softly through the curtains, and everything feels comfortably predictable. But that morning, nothing would stay predictable. That morning, a single sentence shattered 40 years of what I thought was the truth. Before I tell you what happened, I want to know something. Where are you watching this from? It's strange how stories find their way to the most unexpected places, and knowing where mine lands always feels special. It started with a sound barely noticeable at first. My husband Richard had been in the attic all morning. He said he was sorting old boxes, something he rarely did. We'd lived in this house for decades, and that attic was like a sealed time capsule, filled with dusty photo albums, forgotten Christmas decorations, and pieces of our life we never thought to revisit. When I walked past the attic door, I heard him talking to himself, or maybe to someone who wasn't there. His voice was low, almost trembling. Something in that tone made me pause on the staircase. It wasn't the way a man sounds when he's just rummaging through memories. It was the sound of someone reliving them, and not all memories are kind. I called out, "Richard, everything all right?" There was a pause, too long of a pause. Then he answered, "Yes, just found something." But his voice carried that edge, the kind that pulls at your gut and tells you the truth is much heavier than the words themselves. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw him sitting cross-legged on the attic floor, holding an old wooden box. The kind you don't buy, the kind you keep because it's tied to something important. His hands were trembling, and his eyes looked like they had traveled back in time. "What's that?" I asked softly. He hesitated, almost as if deciding whether I deserved the answer. Then, without looking up, he said, "It's something I hoped you'd never have to see." My stomach tightened. In 40 years of marriage, Richard had never spoken like that. I took a step closer. The box was unlocked, but his grip on it was tight, almost protective. Inside, I saw a stack of yellowed letters, each tied with a faded blue ribbon. There was also a photograph, worn at the edges, of a young woman I didn't recognize. She had the kind of smile that hid something behind it. "Who is she?" My voice was steadier than I felt. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling sharply. "She's someone from before you. Someone I never told you about. And I had my reasons." Those words hit me like a cold wave. Before me, my husband, the man I thought I knew entirely, was holding a life I had never been part of. The attic felt smaller, the air felt heavier. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and uneven. "Why now?" I asked. "Why keep this for so long?" He looked at me then, and in his eyes was a mixture of guilt, sorrow, and something else. Relief. Because some truths don't just belong to the person who lived them. They belong to the people they could hurt. And in that moment, I realized, whatever was inside those letters, whatever was written on those fragile pages, had the power to change everything I thought I knew. I didn't know yet if I wanted to read them. I didn't know if I was ready. But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of what I was about to learn. I sat down on the attic floor across from him, the wood creaking under my weight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The letters sat between us like a silent witness, holding years of something I couldn't name. My fingers itched to untie that blue ribbon, but I could see in his face that opening them would not just open the past, it would break it wide open. "Richard, how long have you been keeping this?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He ran his hands slowly over the lid of the box, like he was touching something sacred and dangerous at the same time. "Since before we met. Since the day I swore I'd leave it behind. Leave it behind." The words rolled around in my head like loose stones. But you can't leave something behind if you still keep it close enough to hear it breathe. I reached for one of the letters, my fingertips brushing against the brittle paper. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. He didn't stop me, but I saw his jaw tighten. When I lifted the flap, my eyes caught the date, 40 years ago, the year before our wedding. "Do you want me to read this?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the floor, as if the wood grain could give him courage. "If you read it, you'll see a part of me I've tried to bury. I don't know if you'll forgive me for that." Forgive, that word lodged in my chest like a splinter. Forgiveness isn't just about the act, it's about the time lost, the questions that should have been answered years ago. I unfolded the letter slowly, my eyes scanning the first few lines, The handwriting was delicate, slanted, almost artistic. The words began tenderly, but soon they were heavy, weighted with emotion. She called him by a name I'd never heard before, a name he had never told me was his. And then, there it was. A confession. I stopped reading. My eyes lifted to his. You told me your first love was just a story. That it didn't matter, but this. I tapped the page with my finger. This doesn't sound like something that didn't matter. His eyes glistened. She wasn't just my first love. She was my first life. And losing her, it changed me. Changed the way I loved you. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. The attic wasn't just holding dust and memories. It was holding the version of him that I had never met. And now, I couldn't unsee it. He reached for my hand, his touch hesitant, almost afraid I'd pull away. There's more. And if you keep reading, you'll know why I could never tell you. The letters lay there, tied in that faded blue ribbon, each one a key to a locked door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. But I knew one thing. The choice to open them would change everything. And I wasn't ready to close the door just yet. The attic seemed smaller now, the air thicker, as I slid the ribbon loose and pulled the first letter free. My hands trembled not because of the cold, but because I knew that once I began, nothing between us would ever be the same. The paper crackled softly as I unfolded it. I read the first line aloud. Richard, I don't know if this letter will ever find you, but I have to believe it will. My husband closed his eyes at the sound of her words, as though the very act of hearing them pulled him back through time. I could see it in his face. He wasn't here with me anymore. He was 20 again, standing in some moment I could only imagine. The letter went on, each sentence a thread pulling me deeper into a life I'd never known existed. She spoke of stolen afternoons by the river, of promises, whispered under a summer sky, of a love so certain it seemed impossible to lose. But then, her words shifted. By the time you read this, I will be gone. Not because I want to leave, but because I must. What I carry with me now is not just my own heart, it's ours. And I can't let you see it break. I stopped reading for a moment, my throat tightening. Richard, what was she talking about? His voice was low, barely steady. She was pregnant. The words hung between us, heavy and unshakable. I searched his face for something: guilt, regret, hope, but all I saw was a man bracing himself for the weight of the truth. I looked back at the letter, forcing myself to keep going. She wrote about the pressure from her family, the fear of shame, the decision to leave without saying goodbye. She begged him not to come after her, claiming it was the only way to protect them both. If there is any justice in the world, we will find each other again, in another life, where the world is kinder, and our hearts are free. By the time I reached the last line, my vision blurred with tears. I folded the letter slowly, placing it on my lap, my fingers pressed hard against it like I was trying to hold the past still. Richard, what happened to her, to the baby? I asked. He swallowed, his jaw tightening. I don't know. I searched for years. I never found them. And when I met you, I thought I could lock that part of my life away. But every day, for the last 40 years, I've wondered. I didn't know whether to feel anger for the secret he kept, or sorrow for the man who had been carrying it alone all this time. And deep down, I knew this letter was only the beginning. The rest of that box still sat between us, daring me to untie the next piece of his past. And something in me whispered, I had to. I reached for the second envelope. This one was smaller, the paper yellowed more than the first, and the handwriting, it wasn't hers, it was harsher, rushed, as if the words had been poured out in desperation. Richard's eyes locked on it the moment I picked it up. Maybe, we don't have to read that one tonight, he said, his voice almost pleading. But after 40 years of silence, I couldn't stop now. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the page. The first line made my stomach twist. If you ever loved her, you'll stop looking for her. She's gone. The baby is safe, and that's all you need to know. I froze, reading it again. The tone wasn't romantic. It was cold, deliberate. Whoever wrote this wasn't trying to comfort him, they were shutting him out. Do you know who wrote this? I asked. Richard nodded slowly. Her brother. The letter continued, warning Richard to stay away, claiming that too many people know and that his presence would destroy more than it could ever fix. It ended with a single chilling sentence. If you keep searching, you won't like what you find. I lowered the paper, my mind racing. Richard, why would he say something like that? What could possibly be so terrible? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, his back to me. The silence between us was heavy, almost unbearable. Finally, he spoke, because there was more to it than I ever told you. I wasn't just the man she loved. I was the man her family swore she could never be with. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just a lost love. This was a forbidden one. And suddenly, the possibility that someone, maybe even the baby, was still out there didn't feel impossible anymore. The rest of the letters in that box seemed to hum with a dangerous energy, as if opening them would shatter the fragile reality we'd been living in. And yet, my hands itched to know everything. Some truths you think you want, until you start to uncover them, and then you realize there's no going back. I reached for the third letter with trembling fingers. This one was different, thicker, heavier, sealed in a way that felt intentional, almost ceremonial. The wax had long since cracked, but the imprint of a family crest was still faintly visible. Richard didn't move. He just watched me, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Please," he whispered. "Don't." But the truth had already been kept for 40 years, and now it was begging to be set free. I slid the letter out. My breath caught the moment my eyes scanned the first line. "If this reaches you, it means they've lied to us both." The handwriting, it wasn't hers. It wasn't the brother's. It was from someone I didn't recognize, someone who clearly knew more than they should. The words painted a picture of secrecy that was deeper, darker than I'd imagined. The letter spoke of a deal made in the shadows, of a decision to protect the child by erasing the past, and then one sentence that made my heart slam against my ribs. "She never died, Richard. She was taken." I looked up, my mouth dry. "Taken? What does that even mean?" Richard's face was pale, his jaw tight. "It means," he said, his voice low, "that everything I believed about that night, everything I told you, was a lie they wanted me to believe." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. If she hadn't died, if she'd been taken, then somewhere she might still be alive. And if the baby was safe, as the first letter claimed, I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. This wasn't just an old love story. This was a disappearance. And the people who orchestrated it might still be watching us. I went back to the letter, my eyes darting over every word, desperate to find something, anything that would explain who had taken her, and why. Most of the sentences were vague, almost as if they had been written in code. But then, there it was, a name, tucked between lines about keeping her hidden and ensuring her safety was a single reference. "She is with Mrs. Calder, at the house near the bay." Mrs. Calder. I didn't know the name, but the way Richard's eyes widened told me he did. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Richard hesitated, his lips parting as if the answer physically hurt him to say. She was my mother's closest friend. But she moved away decades ago, disappeared without a trace. The bay, that has to mean Harbor Bay. But he trailed off, his eyes locked on some invisible point in the past. I could feel my pulse in my ears. "Richard, if this woman took her, if she's still alive, then we could—" He cut me off, shaking his head. "You don't understand. If Mrs. Calder was involved, this wasn't just a personal decision. This was organized." The word hung between us like a storm cloud. Organized. And just when I thought my heart couldn't pound any harder, Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "If she's still alive, there are people who won't want us to find her." I gripped the letter tighter, feeling the paper tremble in my hands. "Then we have to try." Richard looked at me for a long, silent moment, and, for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear. We didn't sleep that night. The letter lay on the kitchen table like a dangerous animal, quiet, but capable of striking at any moment. Richard sat across from me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "We need to find Mrs. Calder," I said, breaking the silence. "If she's the key to all of this, we can't just sit here." Richard rubbed his forehead. "You don't understand. If I start digging, people will notice. People who have been keeping this secret for 40 years. They'll know." His words should have scared me off, but they had the opposite effect. "Then, let them know. I'm tired of living in the dark." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Richard stood, walked to the old cabinet in the hallway, and pulled out a dusty metal box. Inside, I saw photographs, old letters, and a small leather address book. "This was my mother's," he said, flipping through the worn pages until his fingers stopped here. "Calder Malee address listed as Harbor Bay, but There's no number, just the street name. I felt a rush of determination. Then, that's where we start. Before Richard could answer, there was a sound outside, a soft crunch of gravel. I froze. We lived on a quiet road. No one came here unless they had a reason. Slowly, I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain just an inch. A black car was parked across the street. Its engine was running, headlights off. Richard joined me, his face pale. That's not a neighbor. The moment our eyes met, the car's headlights flared on, blinding us before it pulled away into the night. I felt a chill run through me. Whoever they were, they wanted us to know we were being watched. By the next morning, the decision was made. Richard didn't say it outright, but the way he moved, packing a small bag, double-checking the address book, told me he had accepted it. We were going to Harbor Bay. The drive was quiet, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, the kind that feels like both people are holding their breaths. Outside the window, the scenery shifted from city streets to winding coastal roads, the ocean flashing silver under a sky heavy with clouds. When we finally reached the street from the address book, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The houses here were older, weather-beaten by salt and wind. And then I saw it, a small, pale blue cottage with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox that read Calder in faded letters. Richard slowed the car to a crawl. "That's it," he murmured. We stepped out, our shoes crunching on gravel, and walked up the narrow path. Before we could even knock, the door opened. An elderly woman stood there, her posture straight, her eyes sharp as if she'd been expecting us. "You took your time," she said, her voice calm but carrying a strange weight. 40 years is a long time to leave the truth buried. Richard froze, his lips parting but no words coming out. Mrs. Calder's gaze shifted to me. "And you must be the reason he's finally here. Good. Maybe now he'll stop running." I felt the air grow heavier. "Running from what?" I asked. Her answer was slow, deliberate. "From the day everything changed. From the promise he made on the night someone died." Richard's hand gripped mine so tightly it almost hurt. And then Mrs. Calder stepped aside. "Come in. You both need to hear the whole story before it's too late." We crossed the threshold, the door shutting behind us, with a sound that felt final. The living room smelled faintly of salt and old wood. Photographs covered the walls, sepia tones, faded colors, moments frozen decades ago. Mrs. Calder moved slowly to an armchair, lowering herself with a sigh, her eyes never leaving Richard. "You were just a boy," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But you remember that night as clearly as I do, don't you?" Richard sat down opposite her, his posture rigid. "I've tried not to." I stayed standing, my hands clasped together to keep from shaking. Mrs. Calder's gaze softened, but her words cut deep. "Your father's car, the storm, and the man on the road. We all knew him. We all knew his family." Richard's face drained of color. "I told you I didn't see him." "You did see him," she interrupted, her tone firm now. "And you swerved too late. Your father made you swear to forget it, to let everyone believe it was the storm's fault. But it wasn't. Richard, and that man, he was my brother." The room went so still I could hear the ticking of the clock on the mantel. My husband's shoulders shook, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. "I thought if I stayed away, if I built a life far from here, it would fade." Mrs. Calder leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "But secrets don't fade, they rot. And when they rot, they poison everything around them." I felt my chest tighten, the enormity of what I'd just heard pressing down on me. This wasn't just a hidden family story, it was the kind of truth that rewrites every chapter before it. Richard turned to me, his expression torn between shame and relief. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see me differently. But I can't carry it anymore." And then Mrs. Calder's next words sent a chill through me. "There's something else you don't know. Something that will change how you see all of us." She reached for a small, locked box on the coffee table. The key was already in her hand. The small brass key turned with a soft click, and the box creaked open as if it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed handkerchief, was a bundle of letters tied with fraying ribbon. Mrs. Calder's hands trembled as she lifted them out. "These," she said quietly, "are from my brother. He wrote them to me after the accident. Letters no one else was ever meant to see." Richard leaned forward, his knuckles white. "You kept them." "I couldn't throw them away," she replied. "Every word is him. Every line is the man we lost. And in the last letter, he forgave you, Richard, before he even died. The words hit the air like a slow, heavy wave. My husband's breath caught in his throat, his eyes filling with tears that spilled over silently. I've lived 40 years believing that night destroyed everything, he whispered. I never knew he forgave me. Mrs. Calder reached across the space between them, placing her hand over his. Forgiveness is useless if it's buried. I should have told you long ago. But I was angry, so angry that I let you carry a weight that wasn't yours alone. The letters lay between them, fragile and powerful, as if the paper itself could breathe life back into the moments they'd both lost. Richard turned to me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw the boy he once was, scared, ashamed, but aching for someone to tell him it was going to be all right. I stepped forward, resting my hand on his shoulder. We can't change the past, I said softly, but we can decide what we do with the truth now. His fingers closed over mine, and in that moment, something shifted. The decades of silence, the layers of guilt, the hidden history, they didn't vanish, but they loosened their grip. We sat there together, the three of us, surrounded by letters and memories, the clock still ticking steadily on the mantel. And for the first time, I realized that the real secret wasn't the accident, it was how much of our lives we'd let it steal. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know this: we won't go back to the way things were, not after tonight. If you've ever uncovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew, tell me where in the world you're watching from. Your story matters too, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to tell it.